Welcome to What Not to Do. I'm Kyle Schmitz, and this is episode 26. I read the Go-Giver series for the first time this past summer of 2019, and it changed my life. It cast a vision for how I wanted to live, and today I have the author, Bob Burg, on the line. He shares with us his story and how his biggest failure cost him millions. Hold on tight. You're going to love it. We'll be right back. All right, you want to know why? Well, I'll tell you why. My why is to use my presence and my prose to inspire you to go all in on you so that you live a legacy worth leaving. Again, to use my presence and my prose to inspire you to go all in on you so that you live a legacy worth leaving. And I want to inspire 1 billion people to live a legacy worth leaving by 2030. That's 10 years. That's 100 million people per year. So let's go. Join me in this mission to help equip the world for success and inspire 1 billion people to live a legacy worth leaving. Well, I'm really excited to have this conversation with Bob Burg, and it gets personal for me because Bob's an author. He's a keynote speaker. He's written some great books, in particular the Go-Giver series, and it's been a book in a series that has been very impactful for me. So it's super exciting, and I'm excited to get to know Bob's story. This is the first time Bob and I have chatted, which is exciting. And Bob, thank you so much for taking some time and being willing to open up about not just what you've done right, but also failures. So
great to be with you, Kyle. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're drinking some coffee, right? You got a cup of something warm over there?
Always drinking my Dunkin' Donuts.
I love it. Dunkin' Donuts isn't too popular up here. I'm up in Greenville, Wisconsin, and we do have one in town, but there's a few coffee shops locally that rival them and whatnot. But Dunkin' is good. It's a good. So a lot of our listeners may already know who you are. They may have already read your books, et cetera. But I think there's a lot that may not even be familiar with you. And so, just as if this was the first time we were at a coffee shop, just getting to know each other, tell us a bit just about who you are, what you love to do, family, where you come from, step outside of writing and business. Who is Bob Burg?
Well, grew up in Massachusetts, got down south to Florida as soon as I could.
Yeah.
Warm weather guy. And so it would be difficult for me up in the ice bowl. But and began in broadcasting, then sales, moved to over to speaking eventually once I had a platform for doing so after my sales career. And although I've never stopped selling, of course, it's
yeah.
And I've been doing this now, the speaking, for about 30 years, and I enjoy it. I've been very fortunate to be in a business that I really love.
Yeah, it's amazing. I've heard it said, what are you good at? What do you enjoy doing? And what are your economic opportunities? And where those three things can align, it's a sweet spot. And I can imagine those three things are aligning for you and have been for some time.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point, because it isn't just doing what you love, and it isn't just doing what you're good at, although I think those are great to start out with and take deeply into consideration. But where I think a lot of the kind of advice givers sometimes miss the boat is they leave it there. And while it's not correct advice, it's not complete, because you also have to have a way to make it marketable. Otherwise, you have a hobby, and there's nothing wrong with hobbies, it's just having them. But you don't have a business unless you have got people who you're a marketplace you're able to serve, people who are going to be buying from you, and that it will be profitable enough to be sustainable and provide you with a healthy income.
Yeah. Well said. I couldn't agree more. Hey, this is Kyle. Well done on your decision today to be great. Those are my kiddos in the background. Hey, if you want more of this kind of content, find me on social media. We'll keep the conversation going. You can hit me up on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, at StartWithWNTD. Again, at StartWithWNTD. We'll see you there. So tell us a little bit about then what it is exactly that you do today. You've alluded to a little bit, but then also walk us backwards and draw that timeline to how you got to where you are today. Did you always know? And I know you mentioned sales, et cetera. Take us just a little bit deeper. Did you always know that you wanted to
be an author, be a speaker? How did that come about? Was that the main goal? And after leveraging sales, et cetera, giving yourself a platform, or kind of take us on the evolution?
Well, when I was a kid, I wanted to grow up to be third baseman for the Boston Red Sox. I think I could have done it other than having no talent whatsoever. And so I got into sportscasting on radio, and then television. I was working for a very, very small ABC affiliate in the Midwest. From there, I graduated into sales. Knew nothing about sales, and the training where I was first working was negligible at best. So for the first few months, I really floundered. And fortunately, one day I was in a bookstore and came across a couple of books. One was by Zig Ziglar, the other was by Tom Hopkins. And I bought the books, and it just changed everything for me, because I studied what they wrote. I did what they wrote, and immediately my sales began to go through the roof. And it was fascinating to me on a couple of levels. One was because it said, well, if there's I didn't even know there was any methodology to selling. I mean, I didn't know. I had not been in that world. So to me, it was, you went into, you knocked on doors, or you called, or you, whatever it is you did, and you talked about your product and hope they bought. That was my, sales. And so I realized there was instead an entire art and science behind it. And that it was not so much about your product; it was about how you could benefit someone's life by helping them own your product or service. And so that made a big difference. And the other thing I got to find out once I began studying sales is that it was really much more about personal development. Techniques are fine and certainly very necessary. The skill set and so forth, but it was really about building yourself on the inside. And that success manifests outwardly, but it grows inwardly. So I just began to get books, the books that I'm sure you have you have a great library. I'm sure you have many of the books, such as How to Win Friends and Influence People, The Magic of Thinking Big, Think and Grow Rich, Psycho-Cybernetics, and, As a Man Thinketh, and all these, these classics. I just began getting and just absorbing it. And it was really helping me grow. And eventually I worked my way up to sales manager of a company down the road, and eventually began teaching sales, and it kind of morphed into a speaking career, and then the writing from there.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so one of the things I loved about your book series with it's John Mann, correct? Co-author. Yep.
Right.
Was it? It gave me a context, or it helped to articulate what I would call like my intrinsic bent or philosophy towards dealing with people in sales, et cetera. And I didn't really have a category for it, because there's a lot of books out there on sales, et cetera, that teach you the methodology and train, but it still can feel like it's a numbers game, or you're always playing the cards or that type of thing. And there's that pull to want to constantly compete and kind of fall into that scarcity mindset versus this understanding of abundance. And yes, there's a place for methods, right? Because they're valuable and help to serve people, but it's not the primary emphasis in that regard. So how did you come to that realization in your own career as you've been studying, Zig Ziglar, kind of following that train and that domino effect, and then where you were able to actually pen it for yourself?
Well, I think one breakthrough for me came a couple of years after I began selling. And again, I had learned it, and I was doing well. And I got to a certain point where I sort of peaked and stayed there. And it really was a matter of my not placing my focus in the right direction. And here's what I mean. I was doing well, but not realizing my potential by any means. And one day I came back to the office. I was selling for a company. It was a high-end product. And I came back to the office disgusted with myself, because I had just been on a non-selling appointment, but it was not non-selling by design. It was supposed to be a selling appointment. My own, fault that this person who really would have benefited from this product didn't end up buying. And it was really on me. And I remember one of the older guys there saw me sitting there, I guess, feeling sorry for myself or whatever. And he wasn't in the sales department. I think he was one of the engineers or something, a real nice guy, a much older guy. And he was one of these people, I'm sure you've met people like this. He didn't say much, but whenever he did say something, it was always very profound. And he said to me, Berg, can I give you some advice? And I said, yeah, absolutely. Please do. And he said, if you want to make a lot of money in sales, he said, don't have making money as your target. Your target is serving others. Now, when you hit the target, he said, you'll get a reward. And that reward will come in the form of money. And you can do with that money whatever you choose. But never forget, he said, the money is simply the reward for hitting the target. It ain't the target itself. Your target is serving others.
Yeah. And
that's when it kind of hit me that great salesmanship was never about the salesperson. Great salesmanship was never even about the product or service, as important as the product or service is. What great salesmanship is about is bringing such immense value to your customer. In other words, it's about how they will benefit from the product, from the service, from the experience. And just like Joe in The Go-Giver, the main protege, if you recall, he had a lot of potential. He was a real hard worker, but his focus was on himself. It was on himself, just like mine was. It wasn't that he didn't care about the product. It wasn't that he didn't care about his customers. He did, and I did. But it was still self-focus. And this is why The Go-Giver itself, the entire premise of that book, really the entire series, but it begins with that first book. The premise is simply that shifting your focus from getting to giving. And when we say giving in this context, we simply mean constantly and consistently providing immense value to others, understanding that doing so is not only a pleasant way of conducting business, it's the most financially profitable way as well. Not for some woo-woo way out there, reason, no, just do good things and good. No, it's actually, when you think about it, it's very logical. It's very rational. When you're that person who can take your focus off of yourself and place it on making other people's lives better, people are much more attracted to you, but they want to get to know you. They like you. They trust you. They're much more likely to want to be in your life. It's an interesting thing. When I speak at a sales conference, I'll often begin by saying, and I say this not dogmatically, but in a way that we all know, I'm just kind of poking fun. I'll say, nobody's going to buy from you because you have a quota to meet, right? No one's going to buy from you because you need the money. And they're not even going to buy from you because you're a really nice person who believes in what you do. They're going to buy from you only because they believe they'll be better off by doing so than by not doing so. And basically, free market economy in which we live. And when I say free market, I simply mean no one is forced to buy from anyone else.
Right.
So that's the only, in this kind of economy, it's the only reason why anyone should buy from anyone else, from you, from me, from anyone, because they believe benefit. Now, this is great, because what it does is it says to that salesperson, it says to that entrepreneur, that if you want to succeed, you must place your focus on making this other person happy, giving them something they want, making their life better. And that's really, what it's all about.
Hey, thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, and only if you think the show deserves it, would you go over to Apple Podcasts and give us an honest, thoughtful 5-star review? This will really help us in our mission to equip the world for success.
Yeah. I love the way that you said it within the book. And I recently read a book called The Science of Getting Rich, another classic written in 1910. And
by Wallace D. Wattles.
Yes, exactly. And you said, and he said, give more in use value than what you take in cash value. So for, let's say, the Go-Giver sells for $10, right? But that book gives me $1 million idea or shifts my mindset, and all that kind of stuff. You've effectively given me more in use value than what you've taken in cash value. And I'd probably buy 100 more copies of that book just so I could give them away because of how much value you gave to me. And I thought that was a really good example of what that actually means in real life. And it's exactly what you're saying. And it's exactly what I'm doing in this podcast is wanting to give so much more than what I take, right? And how our communities, our families, our lives, the world around us could be so much better if we shifted that focus to giving so much more in use value than what we were taking in cash value.
Exactly. So both parties profit. We use as an example in the story Ernesto's, Iafrate's Italian Cafe, and it's a very successful restaurant. It's in the swanky part of the town, and if you go there to eat, you're probably going to pay a good amount of money to do so. Mm-hmm. But when you've eaten there, you come away feeling like you receive much more than what you pay. You receive much more value, or as Waddles would say, use value. From the time you enter the restaurant and they hold the doors open to you and you're introduced to Sal, who takes you over to the table, and the wait staff introduce themselves, and they do it as a team, and they know exactly when to come over and when to stay away and let you enjoy. The food is presented wonderfully and it tastes great. The entire ambiance of the restaurant, when you leave and you come away, you may have paid $100, $150, but you come away feeling like $1 million. Mm-hmm. Well, you receive more in use value than what you paid in cash value. Meanwhile, Mr. Iafrate, certainly the food and all the costs of goods sold, the food, the staff, the machinery, everything obviously cost him much less than what he charged. Yeah. One of my old heroes, Harry Brown, used to say in a free market-based exchange where no one's forced to do so, but everyone does so on their own volition, there are always two profits: the buyer profits and the seller profits, because each of them came away better off afterwards than they were beforehand.
That's a great way to think about it too. Yeah, that's wonderful. Okay, so tell us why. Tell us why you wake up every morning after 30 years of speaking and several books, not only the Go Giver series, but Endless Referrals, which is on my shelf. It's a great read for understanding how that works. Why are you giving your life to this, Bob, when you could be doing 100 other things?
It's the combination that I really love it. I mean, I feel great about it when I do it. I enjoy bringing the message to the world. I'd like to think that the message itself has value that has added to the lives of others. And I make a great living from doing it. So that threefold aspect, right?
Yeah, that sweet spot.
That we enjoy and financially feasible.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, and if everyone could drive, and Jim Collins talks about it in his book too, Good to Great, and just a little bit different wording. But again, what are you good at? What do you enjoy doing? And what are your economic opportunities? What fuels that economic engine? And you found that sweet spot. So why would you do anything else, right? Yeah, that's awesome.
That was a wonderful book. Good to Great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very impactful. Okay, so this podcast is about failures, right? And so as you're, there's a lot out there that's telling us what to do, which is really, really helpful and good. But we know that, success and failure go hand in hand because we're humans. We're going to make mistakes, and failure isn't a foe to be feared. It's a friend, it's a mentor, it's a coach, it's a trainer to push through. In the same way that we would lift weights and our fibers break down, but we become stronger. I think that's the right perspective or mindset on failure, to be able to wield it, to be able, in service for others, not to be afraid of it. But I'm curious for you, over the course of your career, you've seen great success. You're loving what you're doing. You're good at it, and it's serving others. You get the economic rewards from that, which is so awesome. Over the course of your career, what's a failure that comes to mind as far as just rises to the top, and you're like, if I could have that one back again, and let's double click on that. Maybe unpack the story for us, what happened, and we'll go from there.
Well, first, there are plenty of failures. I mean, failure is, one of those bricks on the road to success. We know that, and that's easy to say. But, but not only have I had many more failures than I've had successes, the failures aren't necessarily fun. And I think sometimes the advice we get is, hey, it's failure. It's okay. It's good. It's right. And it is. But at the same time, that doesn't mean it's supposed to be pleasant.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
it's one of those politically correct aspects of, I think, the personal development business, where sometimes, we look at the yucky things that happen and say, oh, it was really good. Now, in retrospect, it probably was, by the way. It usually was. But at the time, when someone's going through something bad, one thing I'll never say to them is, oh, no, this is a great thing. You just don't realize it yet. It's first, how lousy I feel for them, because it stinks. It feels yucky to go through it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think it's okay for anyone who has failures, which is all of us. It's okay to feel badly about it. Hey, it's a failure. It's not, by definition, it's not something that's the desired result.
Absolutely. It's not the end.
At the same time, as you're saying, which I love, is we can utilize each of those in order to grow and go even further than we would have probably had we not had that failure. And how many stories do we see of people who failed in certain areas even when it looked like they were right there, and rather than ruining them and destroying them, they actually got stronger because of it, and made them stronger and more profitable, and had more fun, and had more, and so forth. So I think it's very important. When I look back at one of my many failures, and really things that could have been avoided, it was in the mid to late 90s. And at that time, I'd been speaking for, I guess, about, maybe 7 or 8 years or so. And I'd gotten over that initial 3-year hurdle. It took me a few years to build it up to being sustainable. And I got to tell you, I had some really, really good clients, especially one real big one. And by the way, saying one real big one is a sign that this may not end up happy with that part. And so, but one really big one that was very lucrative, and I was kind of coasting along and doing well. And about that time is when the internet really began to be a thing, right? And people were starting to use it, and it was more than just, you've got mail and doing instant messaging. It now became, a marketing tool and something people were going to. And I have always been sort of a technophobe, okay? Technology has never been my buddy, in terms of me feeling comfortable with it. And although all the signs said, and people who knew me said, you really need to get up to speed with this thing, I just didn't want to. And I felt my business was fine as it was. My clients weren't going to leave me. I was always going to have this and that and yada, 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 right, as they said on Seinfeld. And all of a sudden, in a short period of time, I didn't have a business anymore. My big client, who had made a shift to really going more with the technology, they kind of dropped. Well, they didn't kind of drop me. They dropped me. And others, it just was not as easy. Now I was behind the 8 ball, because now I didn't know how to do those things so I had to start all over again. And fortunately, I partnered with someone who understood technology and made that easy for me, and so forth. But here's really the point. Change can be a difficult thing. And again, this is one of those, politically correct things. Oh, change is good. We love change. Everything. Well, I hate change. I like to really perfect something, or get to the point that it's almost there. It's never perfected, but to the point that it's, mastered, and then kind of just go with it. Well, it's not life. And so the point wasn't, did I want to change? No, I didn't want to. The point was, I needed to change despite not wanting to. And when I refused to do that, I got left behind. Now, successful people, consistently successful people, deal in truths. Okay, they don't look at the world as they'd like it to be and say that's how it is. Okay, they look at things how they are. They understand business principles. They understand human nature. They understand economic principles. They understand what's happening in the environment out there, the business environment, and what's going on, and they act accordingly. Now, that doesn't mean seeing something as it is doesn't mean you're not going to improve it. No, but you're going to work within those truths in order to improve it. And I didn't do that, and it really cost me. And I would say in my career, that is probably the biggest mistake I made. And, fortunately, I learned from it, but it really wasn't something that I should have had to learn from at that time, because I knew better And yet I took the lazy way out and did it the way I wanted to anyway.
All right, I want to know who's next. Who do you want to hear on what not to do? Which entrepreneur, which leader, which public figure in your network do you want to hear on the show? Maybe it's you. Maybe you need to be here. So let's connect me with whomever, and we'll sit down for coffee, a beer, or even a cigar, and together equip the world for success.
Yeah. Man. What's your ballpark guess? What did that cost you economically, quantitatively? Is that seven figures that it cost you?
It cost me a couple of million. Lost this and yeah.
And then qualitatively, right? Because it's not just the quantitative aspect. The qualitatively, the relationships, all the kinds, the ability to serve folks. Having to start over from scratch. That's interesting. So just to take one step back, you had that 3 years of building up that platform. Our failures are often sandwiched in doing something right. We did something right on the front side. We did something right on the back side. But somewhere along the way, we made a poor decision, poor choice. We failed. And hopefully we learned from that failure, which is the right thing on the backside. But leading into it, what was something that you did right? What were you doing right that led to that success right before you had the failure?
Well, when I began speaking as a business, I learned how to do it. I learned the system, right? The methodology. Just like when I read Zig's and Tom's books and started studying all the other books. And, my feeling is if you have a system, a methodology for doing something, personally, I define a system as the process of predictably achieving the goal based on a logical and specific set of how-to principles. The key being predictability. If it's been proven that by doing A, you'll get the desired result of B, then you know that by doing A and continuing to do A and continuing to do A, you'll eventually get the desired result of B. And so I took that to heart once I first learned that. So when I became a professional speaker, immediately I joined the National Speakers Association and began going to their conventions, learning from those that were already successful, buying the books and listening to the tapes. That's how long ago it was, tapes.
What's that?
And that others had written who I knew were successful. And I started following what they did. And I worked really hard at it, but I worked hard following the system that was laid out for me.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Okay. So you're doing things right. You're prepping it. That's what was leading to that success as you're expanding your platform, et cetera. And then how would you phrase your failure in a way that you would tell younger Bob, hey, Bob, you're about to do this. Don't do this. You'd mentioned, that you needed to change despite not wanting to change, right? You were dealing in platitudes and not realities. How would you say it in a way that to not do this or don't do this? How could you summarize that failure? Don't do, fill in the blank.
Well, I think if it was a person who I was talking to, I would probably ask them, if I got the feeling that they weren't willing to change, I would probably just ask them the question, what is it you're looking to accomplish, in your career or through doing what you're doing? What is it you would like to avoid happening? And when they say, and I'd say, well, based on what you know about how things are moving in this direction, what do you feel would be the best actions to take that would most likely result in the best outcomes?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. And then helping them to see, okay, if that's what you want, then here's what you're going to have to do to get it, right? Exactly. Yeah, that's good. And obviously that would anticipate that kind of, if you were to go back and counsel younger Bob, that's exactly what you tell him to do. You'd, hey, stop here. what is it that you want? Right. And then, okay.
Yeah. Well, with young Bob, there was even something that, let's say the young Bob, not of 20 years ago, but the young Bob of, I'm 62. So about 40 years ago or even a little more,
mm-hmm.
Bob who's 20 years old, let's say, I would probably say, young Burg, shut up and stop talking so much because, you don't know half of what you think you know. And most of the other stuff you're absolutely sure you do know. It just isn't true. And you're going to find that out if you don't pay attention. So you find out.
Yeah,
I was
that's
pretty certain. I was pretty certain that I had things figured out at a very young age. I understood I felt I understood human nature. I understood the way the world worked. I saw things very one-dimensionally, and I was sure I was right. And I found out really, really well that I was not right.
Hmm. Well, that makes two of us. We both have the world completely figured out, so we can just be done with the call now, right? I'm teasing. Oh, that's so good. I my guess is that myself included, there's a handful of listeners that would have maybe given them their younger selves the same advice to shut up. Oh, that's great. All right. Well, let's do this. I'm going to throw you through the gauntlet here. With a few outro questions. In life, we're inescapably influenced. And I love, I think out of my favorite of the Go Giver series, it's the Go Giver Influencer, right? And there's so many different things that influence us, directly, people that we meet with in person or even, via technology like this, or indirectly. All right. So before we met, for instance, your books shaped and influenced me, right? And you had no idea who I was. It can be positive, right? Maybe someone coming along in life and saying, "Hey, Bob, you can do more." And they walk away, complete stranger. They have no idea the impact they just made in your life, right? Or we've had folks on the show that were told when they were young, they were never going to be anything in life, right? And that pinballed them to go be something great. So it's amazing the ways and the dimension in which we can influence. But I'm curious for you, Bob, who kind of rises to the top as far as impact? If you were to take them out of the equation for your life, you just wouldn't be the Bob Burg that you are today.
Well, it probably sounds cliche, but it would be my parents. I was very lucky, very fortunate to be blessed with great parents, very encouraging, who believed in me. And so, very, very fortunate in that way. And my dad, who, like me, or I, like him, more in the public spotlight. And so I got to see how he dealt with people in such a kind and uplifting and encouraging way. His level of people skills was just off the chart. For him, it was all natural, though. For me, it really wasn't. I'm glad I got to learn from him because I don't have a natural love for people that I think my dad has always had. Okay, and he came from a very difficult circumstances, and yet he had always a natural love for people, and I think that just came out in a sense of encouragement, and kindness, and with me, I really had more things going on inside my own head, so it wasn't natural. But because I had such a great example to learn from, I was able to emulate that. So yeah, I would definitely say that.
That's wonderful. Yeah, it is a gift. Exactly what you said. That's a gift.
Well, it is one of my main goals to give you more in use value than what I take from you in cash value. And so, man, I love that this podcast is for free. And I really hope that you are finding just incredible value. Who knows, maybe in one of these episodes, you'll take an idea that will be worth $1 million to you. And that's so awesome. If you believe in this and what we're doing here and you'd like to give, you can go to patreon.com/whatnotttodo and you can give according to your heart's desire. But seriously, every little bit helps in our mission to equip the world for success. Thank you so much.
All right. So enough good advice floating around these days. I'm curious, what's some of the worst advice that you hear float around these days? And not necessarily the worst of all time, but just some really bad advice that you've heard floating around, or maybe that you were given somewhere along the way.
So, I think when there's, if you want to say bad advice, it tends to come out. And remember, we were talking earlier in our discussion about the what I called incomplete advice. Do what you love and what you're good at. And I said, well, and then you said about also it has to be marketable. It has to, well, so often you get told just, follow your bliss and the money will happen. Well, again, it's, I understand that, and certainly lead with find your bliss. That's wonderful. But understand it's not just that, right? It's got to be completed with it being something marketable. You've got to find a way to, right. I think that's the case in a lot of that. People will say, well, and I hope this doesn't come out the wrong way, but when people say about, be authentic, well, obviously that's an important thing. It's law 4 from the Go-Giver, the law of authenticity. But I think people confuse authenticity with sort of this is how I am, take it or leave it, right? Which is great advice if you want to have no friends and not make a lot of money, okay? Because it's really difficult to make money and have a lot of friends and good relationships that way. Or they confuse authenticity with just saying whatever you want. You know what I'm saying? Or they'll see someone who, let's say, and I am not pointing out one singular person. So if you're thinking of one, not you, but if someone's listening, think of one person. No, I see this with a lot of people where on stage they curse from stage, use a lot of bad language, and yet they're very, very successful. Well, they're very, very successful not because they curse on stage. They're very, very successful because they're very, very brilliant and have found a way to add immense value to the marketplace. But what happens is, I think the advice about, the authentic and they confuse that thinking, oh, that's authentic, so I need to swear from stage, right? And so again, it's, of course, be authentic, be yourself. But authentic doesn't mean that you just say anything you want to say, that you don't filter yourself or that, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. And we've always got to take it within the context that it's meant. So, I think those are the things we hear. And so often when someone gives advice, remember, they're giving it based on their belief system, their subjective truths, based on, upbringing, environment, schooling, everything that's come into their life that has formed their belief system, or what I call an unconscious operating system. Okay. So we tend to live our lives based on those premises that we accepted before we were even too young to do so consciously. But we don't really realize that. And we tend to think most other people are coming from the same basic set of beliefs and experiences, which they're not. So when someone gives you a set, it says, this happened, this person said this, that, what do I do? Well, remember, if we're going to just answer that question based on that information, we're filling in a lot of blanks through our own belief system. Mm-hmm. Which may have had nothing to do. And I see people doing this, and I've seen people give advice to people that it is not good advice. And the reason I say not good advice is because they couldn't possibly have enough information to know if what they were saying was the right advice. So I think it comes down to that more than any other real specific things. It's always approaching it, checking your premises first, and making sure that what we're saying is taken both in context and with enough information of everyone's situation.
Yeah, it's so good. It reminds me of the old saying that the best lies are half truths. Right? There's a similar principle there, to where the worst advice is half complete. Exactly. When you're talking about authenticity, a book idea came to mind: How to Lose Friends and Repulse People. Right? Maybe fun scoop on that. All right, so we're going to get to some of your book recommendations here in just a moment. But the last question I have for you, Bob, is it's rush hour in every major city in the world, all the way down from Green Bay, Wisconsin, all the way down to Florida, to Jupiter, Florida, right, to Hong Kong, the UK, and billions of people listening to What Not to Do with Bob Burg, right? Naturally, what else would you do on your commute, right? And they're stuck in a traffic jam. They look up and they see a billboard, and it's Bob Burg's billboard. What do you know? How ironic. Bob, what message do they see? What message do you want the world to see?
It would be, whenever possible, make people feel or help people feel genuinely good about themselves. That's it. And there's a lot to that, but that's the sentence. That's the phrase. Because when we can do that, look at the world we create, both for the other person, for ourselves, and for everyone whose life is somehow touched in the future by that person.
Yeah. Love it. Awesome. Okay.
And really, I'm just carrying on my dad's legacy in terms of, in terms of that.
Yeah. Which is wonderful, right? Yeah. I mean, it's fun to see his fingerprints on you, right? But to never have met him, which is cool.
Well, I'm really excited to share with you that What Not to Do has been gaining traction and momentum and experiencing some early wins, which is super exciting, and reminded me this show is about you, it's for you, and I couldn't do it without you. So thank you so much. If you're part of a company, if you own a company, and you think your message would be really, really relevant and valuable to the folks that are part of this community, entrepreneurs, leaders, public figures, and those aspiring as such, reach out to me. My contact info is in the show notes, and we can sit down and consider what it would look like to partner together in equipping the world for success.
All right. So give us 3 books, Bob. I see a whole bunch behind you on a shelf, but they don't have to be your favorite books, but books that you think would be really impactful. And, the longer that people postpone reading them, the worse their lives are going to be. I don't know about you, but I've had books that, have been sitting on my shelf for a year or two that I finally read. And I was like, why didn't I read this 5 years ago? So
Those, yeah.
Yeah. 3 books that come to mind for you.
Okay. So one of my very favorite is a book written by Harry Brown. I mentioned him a little earlier. And the book is called The Secret of Selling Anything. Now, here's the thing. This book was published posthumously. He died about 10 years ago, and his widow had actually found 2 manuscripts, 2 very short manuscripts, in the hard drive that, for whatever reason, because he published several books, a couple of them actually went New York Times bestseller, but this, for whatever reason, he never meant to publish. He must have just written because he was doing training for others. But one of them was on human nature, understanding human nature, and the other was on how understanding human nature relates to successful selling. So the person she sold the rights to put it in one book, one brief book, and called it The Secret of Selling Anything. And it's brilliant. It's absolutely, with Harry, and I got to know him for a little while when he was alive. He was a very kind, gentle man. I don't know if Harry ever actually had an argument with anyone, that kind of guy, but he had a very deep understanding of and respect for human nature. Again, he was a guy who dealt in truths. So he didn't try to change people. He worked within what already was in order to effect change. And by the way, the secret of selling, in one sentence, as he says in the book, the secret of selling anything need not be a secret. It's simply find out what the other person wants and help them get it.
Yes.
But his book is absolutely now it was written back in 1960. So some of the language is very out of date, but so if someone purchased the book, I ask them not to let any of that bother them. Just get the message from it.
Yeah.
Okay?
Great.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, yeah, that's great. And I love exactly what you said. Sales is all about helping someone else get what they want, and you got to figure out what that is and then do it. So yeah, awesome.
Another one was written by a woman by the name of Annie Duke. Now, if you're a poker player, you would recognize her as a world champion poker player. She was in those, televised Las Vegas tournaments. I'm not a poker player. I know one game, blackjack or 21. I know nothing about poker, but you don't have to in order to benefit from this book. And the name of the book is Thinking in Bets. And it's basically how to make the best decisions when you don't have all the facts. And it's an absolutely brilliant book on thought processes and on thinking and how to make decisions that are most likely to have the right outcomes. Awesome. It's absolutely brilliant. Another one, I'm rereading this one right now, as a matter of fact, and it's Principles by Ray Dalio, who's the billionaire founder of the Bridgewater hedge fund. And again, it starts out in his personal story, and that I'm always one who says you can really learn. Success leaves clues. So and he's a big one for pointing out his mistakes, which is very you would really love it, because he really talks about the mistakes he made and how he bounced back from them. But It's really a great treatise on how to live a good life and how to conduct business and how to, again, make decisions that are more likely to have the best outcomes.
Yeah, and how crucial, how fundamental are the decisions that we make, right? It's really not whether or not we're making decisions, but we're making hundreds of thousands of them perhaps a day. And it leads us to the compounding effect of life. And so very, very important. Bob, this has been absolutely wonderful. Such a joy for me. So much stuff. And it's one of the things I think about is something that you might have said in here, maybe even in passing, maybe you didn't even think about it, but someone on the other end is listening to this and it's just radically altered the course of their life forever. And that's so amazing. And I have the joy and the privilege of being able to broker this conversation where you and I can sit down. The only thing that would have made this better is if we could have done this in person, and who knows what the future holds, but thankful for technology that can connect us 1,000 miles apart. If folks wanted to get in touch with you, connect with you, hear more, what's the best way that they can do that?
Probably the best place is just to go to Burg, and that's BURG.com. And if they scroll down, they can look under books. They can get a chapter of any of my books to see if they like it first before clicking through. If they go to the blog, I have a video series going on right now called Influence and Success Insights, which is really about people skills and influence and positive persuasion and so forth. So I welcome anyone and everyone to come to Burg.com, hang out, and have some fun.
Yeah, and you also have a podcast, the Go Giver podcast, correct?
Yeah, so that one is on, I guess, what do they say in showbiz, hiatus? But I do have a couple of hundred, I think, or close to that in the archives, which people can still listen to. So sure.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, Bob, thank you so much again. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Next time we'll be at the one of the Green Bay coffee shops.
There we go. Yeah, great.
Hey, what an honor to talk with Bob Burg. It's such a joy. I mean, if you would have asked me a month ago, hey, when are you going to be chatting with Bob Burg? I'd be like, what are you talking about? Right? It's just amazing how much can happen in such a short period of time when we set really, really big goals for ourselves and we go after it. And how gracious was it for Bob to be able to give me some time and open up and share some failures with us. I mean, just such a blessing. So rock and roll. Let's recap what Bob told us not to do. First, don't forget that people are your target. Again, don't forget that people are your target. Your quote is not your target. The money's not your target. Serving people is your target. Man, I could riff on this for hours. I've shared before on the podcast how this is the first time in my entire life I've ever been part of a company, which is my own, an opportunity where I actually can make people my target. I mean, it's just amazing. Wherever you're at, and regardless of how your company might see things, yes, you've got your quota, yes, you have certain numbers and KPIs or whatever it might be. Don't forget, people are your targets. Serving them is the main goal. Secondly, don't deny, ignore, fight the truth. Don't deny, ignore, or fight the truth. Look, in Bob's story, he knew he needed to adopt technology, right? And he denied that it was going to be a thing. Then he ignored that, the thing, and then he tried to fight the thing. And the thing was technology. Change was happening, and it cost him millions. Wow, millions. So don't dream in La La Land. Don't think that you don't need to change. Don't resist the change. Be objective. Get help. Get someone else to speak into the situation. Don't deny the truth. Don't ignore the truth, and don't fight it. Right when it's finally knocking at your door, it can cost you majorly. And last but not least, don't talk. Right? Sometimes it's just better to not talk at all. And this was advice that Bob would give his younger self, right? 20-year-old Bob. In Bob's words, shut up. And I wonder, I said this, earlier in the conversation, but man, I needed to give that, advice to my younger self. I sometimes need to give that advice to myself now, right? There's this temptation when we're learning and we can be taking in so much and we're so excited about that. We just want to regurgitate it and get it all out, right? And I really believe that learning is in vain unless we learn for the sake of others. And so I'm all for really trying to, be able to share what we're learning and talk, but really there's something to be said about letting that knowledge steep in us for a little bit right? Letting that knowledge brew in us for a little bit and let it come out of our fingertips in our actions and how we live our lives before we go and talk about it. And then at that point, when our actions are finally consistent with what we think we know and know to be true about the world, hey, then maybe we've got really a platform to be able to share things. And so it's something to consider in your own life. I don't know that you can necessarily just kind of give it a cookie cutter type of deal, but survey your own life, and maybe you'll find that, hey, some really good advice for yourself right now might be, hey, just don't talk, right? Take action. Let whatever you're learning really steep within you, brew within you. Let it come out your fingertips, and then in time, you'll probably find a lot of opportunities to be able to share what you're learning. Well, this has been awesome, man. I love you guys. This podcast is about you. It's for you. And I couldn't do it without you. Thank you so much for sharing this, even as you've been impacted, and I see it spreading around more and more and more, and our listeners are increasing, which is so cool. Remember, my why is to use my presence and my pros to inspire you to go all in on you so that you live a legacy worth leaving. And I want to inspire 1 billion people to live a legacy worth leaving by 2030. So that's 100 million a year. Even in 2020, I got started late, right? So join me in on this mission. A great way you can do that, aside from sharing it, would be to give us a 5-star review on the listening platform of your choice. Apple Podcast seems to be one of the most popular that my listeners are on, so that's great. But wherever you listen, feel free to share it. Feel free to give it a 5-star review. That'd be awesome. And let me know who you'd like to hear on the show next, right? It's exciting, and no one's off the table, right? Bob Burg, a well-known author. Bam, here we are, right? So who would you like to hear on the show? And let's get him on. And maybe that's you. Maybe you're an entrepreneur, leader, public figure that has had some successes, but also some failures, and you're willing to open up, tell us your story, and talk about those failures to help other people. And that's really what we're about, to equip the world for success, and really so that they will live a legacy worth leaving. Well, it's been said that good men learn from their own mistakes, but great men, they learn from the mistakes of others. So go and be great, and we'll see you next time.